everybody. Welcome to our Facebook Live. Mayor Jane here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to tune in. We have an incredible show for you today. As you can see, we usually have one distinguished guest, and today we have two. So we are very, very excited to welcome Congresswoman Kathy Castor and famed author Doris Weatherford here to talk about the 19th Amendment. So very, very exciting topic today. It's also National Dog Day today too. So I have Dessa the office dog is running around here terrorizing the studio. All right, I want to give a COVID update. The cases for Hillsborough County, 36,157 positive cases, including 537 deaths. I always say, I don't know why the number 48 stuck out for me, but when we had 48 deaths, I thought, oh my gosh, that's incredible. And now here we are with over 500. And as I remind everyone on every update, that every one of those numbers represents a life, and that's someone's loved one, family member, neighbor. And so that's why we're working hard as a community every day to reduce the number of infections and certainly to reduce the number of deaths associated with COVID-19. In Florida, there are 608,722 total cases with 10,870 deaths. In Hillsborough County, we've had close to 280,000 tests that have been given, people tested. And if you have seen the daily reports that come out, the positivity rate is slowly going down. So we're hovering right around 6% positivity, but we're also seeing a pretty dramatic decrease in the number of individuals that are being tested for the virus. So always encouraging everyone to go out and be tested. There are test sites all over Hillsborough County, in the city of Tampa, Raymond James Stadium, Lee Davis Center. So go get tested for COVID-19. A lot of individuals are asymptomatic, just have no idea that they have the virus. And as we always say, the best way that you can avoid transmitting or contracting the virus is by wearing your mask, washing your hands often, and staying 6 feet away from others whenever you have the opportunity. So we have to continue doing that. The schools, as everyone I believe is aware, started on Monday in Hillsborough County virtually for a week, and then they're going to look at attending in classroom, and hopefully by then they'll also have the option of virtual e-learning as well. So we're hoping for that here in the city of Tampa so that we don't have any additional outbreaks in our school system. We continue to help our local businesses. Lift Up Local, we're in phase, I think, 3 of that now, where we're helping the restaurants by allowing them to move tables outside so they can serve more customers safely. We also started our last round of One Tampa, providing relief to individual residents for mortgage, rent, and utility assistance. So you got to go to tampagov.net quickly and sign up for that. It's a pretty simplified application process, and I believe it's $5,700 you can get up to. We're also working very closely with Hillsborough County. They receive the CARES funding, and so we're working along with them to help our small businesses and residents in the city of Tampa, actually throughout the entire Hillsborough County. So we're very fortunate that we have so many individuals in our community that work so well together, trying to get through this COVID-19, whether it's addressing the actual virus from the medical front, or it's helping those individuals that have been affected financially by COVID-19. So please visit tampagov.net and look for all the information that you need to know about COVID-19. You can also go to Hillsborough County's site. I think we have a link on ours, and you can learn about the different aspects of the CARES funding. They have residential and small business on that as well. So Women's Equality Day, very exciting. It's celebrated around the United States on August 26th to commemorate the 1920 adoption of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which prohibits the states and federal government from denying the right to vote to citizens of the United States based on sex. So that was, I actually watched a documentary on that the other night, and it was very exciting, very interesting to see both the pro and con, and how that, I believe that the tie-breaking vote came from an individual. His mother had written him a letter and told him to be on the right side of history, and he changed his vote from no to a yes. So that is a lesson that has a number, resonates on a number of levels. First and foremost, listen to your mother. So very, very important. As I said, today we have Congresswoman Kathy Castor and author Doris Weatherford. Kathy's Tampa Bay's voice in the U.S. Congress in Washington, D.C., and has been a very, very loud, proud, and proactive voice for us in Washington. I always knew that, but when I was elected mayor, I found out exactly how much you have done for our community, and we're very, very lucky. She has championed important legislation to take dramatic steps forward to ensure that generations of women enjoy equal rights, equal treatment, and equal opportunities, which we are going to discuss in more detail today. Doris has been publishing books on women's history for more than 30 years and is a well-known political activist. Her latest book, if you can't see on her credenza back there, I have my copy right here, and that is The Fight for Women's Suffrage, A Victory for the Vote, The Fight for Women's Suffrage, and the Century That Followed. So this is going to be a very exciting show. So we will start out with you, Congresswoman Castor. You have had a front row seat to history without a doubt, both as a young girl and a daughter of Betty Castor, the first woman elected to the Hillsborough County Commission, first woman elected to the Florida Cabinet, and the first woman to become the president of the University of South Florida. And I know that everyone was very saddened when her tenure as the president came to an end there. And now, as a member of Congress, you have a national view of the progress still needed, especially in the areas of pay, women in the workplace, and education. So tell us what some of the actions are that Congress has taken or are working on now to address the economic challenges that face women and families every day, especially in those areas mentioned: work, pay, family balance, childcare, and retirement.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for having us on to celebrate the centennial of the women's right to vote in America. It is such an honor to represent Tampa in the U.S. Congress. You know, our community is renowned for the ability of women to be successful in public service, and you are continuing that tradition. And I'm grateful for your leadership throughout the years as well. And Doris, you know, you've been an inspiration to me since I was a young girl, kind of tagging along when my mother was out at various events. And you mean the world to me. And I've learned so much from you. I love to hear your stories, and I love to hear you go in depth about the fight for women's equality and the right to vote. So I'm not going to talk too long because I want to hear more from Doris on this centennial. But I'm in my suffragette white today, kind of representing the women in the U.S. Congress. You know, we have more women serving in Congress than at any point in history. But it's still not good enough. I mean, the population of the country, we're about 50-50, but we're still far behind in representation. So we have a lot of work to do. But let me tell you, having more women and men who support women and have daughters, and everybody has a mother, it really makes a difference when it comes to policy. And I've seen it firsthand. Right after I arrived in Congress, the U.S. Supreme Court had a detrimental decision on pay equity. You know, I think most of us would believe with the principle that if you're doing the same job, a man and a woman should be paid equally. Well, that wasn't always the case. People didn't feel that way. And still today, there is plenty of discrimination in the workplace. against women. Well, right after I was elected, we passed the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. That was the case where Lilly Ledbetter worked for Goodyear Tire for many years, and she was being paid less than a lot of the men. She didn't find out until someone put a note in her locker. And then when she brought her case, they said, "Oh, we're sorry, you're too late. There's a statute of limitations." It went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. They said, "No luck, Lilly." So we passed a law to change that. We continue to work to ensure that women receive equal pay for equal work. For example, we passed Rosa DeLauro Paycheck Fairness Act that will help hold employers accountable for discriminatory practices. We've made major investments to support our female service members and veterans. I'm really proud to say here at the Haley VA, we have one of the freestanding women's health clinics for our veterans there that provides them an opportunity to get their specialized care that they need, from gynecological services to sexual assault and everything that comes with it. You know, we're still battling to get the Violence Against Women Act through the United States Senate. Every few years we have to reauthorize it. Those are the important funds that come to the Spring of Tampa Bay, that come to local governments, that come to our law enforcement agencies, that come to Bay Area Legal Services to help support the victims of domestic violence. And the House reauthorized it already last year. We're waiting for the Senate to act. Can you imagine that they can't get their act together to pass the Violence Against Women Act? But that's where we are. They don't have as many women in the Senate. They need a whole lot more over there. When we passed the increase in the minimum wage called Raise the Wage Act, that is particularly impactful for women because many women are still stuck in those minimum wage jobs. So when we passed the Raise the Wage Act to increase minimum wage to $15 per hour by the year 2025, that will give a raise to about 33 million Americans, including 1 out of 4 women. So that just goes to show. And when you, that means Social Security is important because women live longer. That means support for family caregivers that are often balancing children and their parents and trying to decide, is it worth it to continue in the workplace or should I be taking care of my family? They need additional help. The Congress has worked hard on Title IX to ensure not just Title IX in sports in colleges and universities, but the way we treat sexual assault victims and sexual harassment victims. Under the Trump administration, they're trying to roll back some of those protections. So we've had to pass legislation to address that. And everything we do, it really matters that women are at the table.
Yes.
So we'll continue with that. And those are some of the high profile battles that are going on.
Excellent. And we thank you for that fight. And it is true, you know, if somebody said, if you're not at the table, you may be part of the meal. So it is critically important that we have a very diverse representation. And we have made a great deal of progress as signified by your mom, Betty Castor, being the first in so many different categories. So we have made, and then for me personally, you've heard me talk about Title IX. I mean, that really was the key to success for me, paid for my college education through an athletic scholarship, and really was the key that opened all the doors for me throughout my life. And so while we have made progress, a lot of individuals feel that, you know, like the Equal Rights Amendment, well, we passed that, you know, decades ago, and just not understanding the progress that has yet to be made in the area of women's rights, and critically important. And I don't know that there was an effort to hold women down as much as it was looked at as an economic issue, you know, which you talk about the equal pay for equal work, that individuals just didn't want to have to do that. And so we do have a long way to go. And it is so wonderful to see so many women elected to office. It was just here in Hillsborough County. You looked at all the individuals, all the women that were elected to office locally, on the state, and then hopefully on the federal level. We'll see that continue and possibly see the first female vice president. And
Amen.
yeah, that would be wonderful. So let's see. In 2017, Congress passed a legislation. That's what you talked about before, the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission, to ensure suitable observation of the centennial of the passage and ratification of the 19th Amendment, and brought to the attention the Commission's Forward into Light campaign. And I'm proud to let you know that since you brought that to my attention, and in honor of Doris's outfit today, we are lighting up City Hall in blue and yellow this evening. Yes, so that would be wonderful. And so why don't you tell us a little bit more about that, about the Forward into Light campaign, and how we're trying to bring recognition to this movement, and what it means to our country.
I have a lot to say.
You always do, Doris. That's why we've got you here. You're a wealth of information.
Let me start with Harry Byrne, the legislator in Tennessee who made this possible. And the story is much more complicated than it usually is told. To add an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the founding fathers made it very, very difficult. You need 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of the state legislatures, both chambers in each. So we're talking well over 100 votes. This is a serious, serious campaign and shouldn't have had to happen. Uh, After the Civil War, Congress passed three amendments. The 13th abolished slavery, the 14th granted civil rights to black people, former slaves, and spent most of its time on talking about how the former Confederate states would be reunited into the Union. The 15th Amendment clarified the right of former slaves to vote. But what it said was that neither Congress nor the states should interfere with citizens' right to vote. It did not say male citizens, it said citizens. So, in about more than a dozen jurisdictions from South Carolina to California, women tested that amendment and said, we are citizens, we pay taxes, how about us? And as you know, states control voting rights. States still control voting rights. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having these conversations about mail-in ballots. So what women wanted was to clarify that amendment and say, states may not deny us this right because we are citizens. And they went to court. It was a Missouri case. And the court ruled unanimously that the 15th Amendment didn't mean what it said. It didn't mean citizens. Everybody knew it was just male citizens. And so the fight for the 19th Amendment actually began then in 1893. I'm sorry, in 1873. Meanwhile, women had voted in a lot of places. Wyoming was first in 1869. It granted all rights to women, and they never lost that vote. Utah followed, and Congress struck it down, mainly because many of these women were Mormons, and they thought somehow this was polygamous duplicate votes, and they lost that right. Washington was the third state, and they also lost it on a technicality from their Supreme Court. And Wyoming, I didn't mention at the time, was a territory, not a state. So the first state to enfranchise women was Colorado. And the very next year, 1894, they elected 3 women to their legislature. Utah got their right back after they became a state, and they elected the first female senator in 1896. So think how long ago that was. Uh, the important point um, is that these were Western states, and people forget that. By 1917, when New York finally enfranchised women, every state in the West except New Mexico had enfranchised women. But the East Coast has always controlled the conversation. And this was still radical and dangerous and so forth. Um, and I'm skipping over a lot of details here. But ultimately, Carrie Chapman Catt, who was the leader of the mainstream movement and the first honorary president of the League of Women Voters, in the 1918 election, she targeted 4 senators and won 2 of them. So she had the votes for 2/3 of both houses of Congress. The House had already passed it by 2/3, and the Senate then would have 2/3. But in those days, Congress didn't meet until March. So the November election to March is a long time. And then Henry Cabot Lodge of Massachusetts, who was the Senate president, a man much like Mitch McConnell, uh, delayed it until finally they took the vote on June 4th. He delayed it deliberately because that would slow down momentum for ratification from the states, because most state legislatures had adjourned by then. So it came to Florida while we were still in session. We were scheduled to adjourn on June 5th. And Sidney Katz, who was governor at the time, issued an eloquent appeal to the legislature to stay in session and make Florida the first state to ratify. But Mayman Jennings and her sister-in-law, Mrs. William James Bryan, the wife of the 3-time Democratic nominee, they were the leaders of the suffrage movement at that point, and they did not echo Katz's call. They had put this up for a vote 5 times before in the Florida legislature and had been tricked every time. And they knew that it would be a disaster for the national movement if it lost the first vote out of the gate. So they passed on the opportunity. That was a Friday. And on Tuesday, 3 Midwestern states raced each other to be the first to ratify.
No, we had our chance.
Yeah, yeah.
That darn Florida legislature.
I know.
Yeah. I can give you names. Anyway, the ratification came down very quickly through the winter and spring when legislatures were in session. But by the beginning of summer, they had 35 states and needed 1 more. And again, the point is that people don't understand the reality of history, in that it was the South that ended up doing this. West Virginia did a very dramatic ratification with one of the senators had resigned and moved away, and he came back and tried to claim his seat in the West Virginia legislature to vote against it. And meanwhile, the pro side had gone to California because they had adjourned, and he took a train and raced back to be the deciding vote. So West Virginia was very dramatic. Meanwhile, Carrie Chapman Catt called on the legislatures in Vermont and Connecticut to come into session. And by the way, most of these were special sessions, which is a political miracle to get a governor and legislature to come together, often without pay, And this took a lot of lobbying, tens of thousands of personal lobbying efforts. So anyway, came down to the governors, both Republicans, of Vermont and Tennessee, Vermont and Connecticut, adamantly refused to call a special session. Their legislators probably would have approved it, but both governors refused to call the session. So finally, President Wilson, who was vilified much too much for the facts, in fact, he endorsed suffrage early on, and again, it's just too complicated politically to get into the details now. But the upshot was that President Wilson called on the Democratic governor of Tennessee to call a special session. And he did. He wasn't particularly in favor of the amendment, but he called a special session. The Senate ratified right away, 25-4. And then the House, as you pointed out, tied 48-48 until Harry Byrne stood up and said, my mother told me to vote for it, and I'm changing my vote. And so it passed 49-48. But then the real drama came in. And this is why people are confused about the date, because last week we saw a lot of celebration of the 18th, August 18th, which was in fact the day that Harry Burns changed his vote and it went through the Senate. So why are through the House of Tennessee? So why are we celebrating August 26th instead? Here's the reason why. The anti-forces in Nashville, with the support of a bunch of lobbyists, left Tennessee, went down to Decatur, Alabama, and holed up for a week trying to prevent a quorum in the Tennessee legislature. The governor, who at first had been uncertain about this, finally physically took the certificate of ratification away from the House, mailed it off to Washington. The Secretary of State declared it officially added to the Constitution on August 26th, and that's why we have these two dates. But as Kathy pointed out, politics has been so much improved by women's interests. I don't think we would have a legislature today that would en masse go to another state to try to prevent a quorum. Women have done so much to reform all kinds of injustices, not just injustices based on gender, but honesty in government, uh, ending corruption. And one more thing I want to add before we go back. All of this actually began in 1840 at the World Anti-Slavery Conference in London. The British Empire had abolished slavery just a few years earlier, and there was a world conference in London to try to end slavery elsewhere. Elizabeth Cady Stanton from Boston at that point, and Lucretia Mott from Philadelphia, and several other women who were Quakers were elected by their female anti-slavery societies to go to London and represent them. They got there, and the male delegates, including most of the Americans, said, oh, we can't have women as delegates. They'd be too distracting. You can sit behind a curtain and listen while we debate this, but you can't be delegates. So Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton decided they weren't going to sit behind a curtain. And they took long walks and strategized and decided that when they got back to America, they would start a civil rights movement for women as well as for blacks. Well, Elizabeth had 7 children. Lucretia also had 7 children. And they just couldn't get together to organize this until 1848, when Lucretia went up to Seneca Falls, New York to visit a cousin, and Elizabeth was living there then. they put a 3-line notice in the local newspaper that they were going to have a meeting on women's rights. And to their great surprise, 300 people showed up. We celebrated that 150th in 1998. And I want to point out that Sojourner Truth spoke at the second National Women's Rights Convention, a black woman, a former slave. And black women were involved in the movement from the beginning. There's been a lot of misinformation lately about how black women didn't get civil rights along with white women. They did. It's the difference between de jure and de facto.
Yeah. And also in the implementation too. The passage is one thing, but the implementation. So let me ask you just a couple of quick questions. One, why do you think that the West outpaced the East? Was it more because of that pioneer spirit, or and more of the East Coast was more focused on the business world? And then also looking at that movement where they went over to London, and I've read all about that as well. Your book is very, very informative. But do you think that the voting was based on prejudice against women by the males, or do you feel that that was an economic issue, or more of one that you mentioned that over in London, they were told that they may be a distraction? I would like to think that our country was just a step or two forward thinking from there. But was it they didn't want women included because they thought that we were inferior in some way, or was that based on economy, or just didn't want the change? What's your informed opinion on all of that?
All the above.
All the above. There you go.
Yeah. On the West, they wanted women there. The very first bill introduced into the Wyoming Territory was granting women equal rights because the ratio of men to women was 50 to 1 in Wyoming at that point, and they wanted women to come. And the smart ones wanted women to be a civilizing influence. They deliberately were recruiting the school moms from Massachusetts. And the same thing happened in the Alaska Territory. The very first bill introduced was giving women equal rights. So smart men realized that women were important in a pioneering nation. In the East, it was the business interests, the conservatives, who they were running a corrupt system all over, and they didn't want women voting because women would bring regulation and anti-corruption.
Okay. Now we've gone through how we got the amendment passed, but as you alluded to, the passage is one thing, the implementation is another. And so you look at the state's control over voting. So let's talk about that. When it got to the states, how was it received, and what ways were the barricades put in place to keep not only white women from voting, but Black and African American, in many cases more so than white?
Yeah, absolutely more so. This was the revival of the Ku Klux Klan and anti-progressives in the 1920s and 1930s, and it had a lot to do with the Great Depression and economic opportunity. But at the very, very beginning, Mary McLeod Bethune registered voters here in Florida and was quite successful at getting them to vote. It wasn't until really a decade later that blacks began to be terrorized by the Klan and not dare to vote. But I mentioned Mary McLeod Bethune. Kathy, can you take a minute to talk about her?
Sure. We get all
the
need, Doris.
Very. I think Doris brings up Mary McLeod Bethune, the proud representative of Florida, because Florida is in the process of replacing one of its two statues in the United States Capitol every state sends 2 representatives to the U.S. Capitol to represent their state. And right now we have John Gorey, who invented air conditioning. Everyone seems to love him, especially here in Florida and during the summer. But the other representative is an obscure Civil War Confederate general who, yes, was born in Florida, but didn't spend very much time here. His name's General Kirby Smith. He was also a product of that same era that Doris talks about, the Jim Crow era, where a lot of states and local communities were erecting these barriers and also erecting these statues of, the traitors to the Union, these Confederate soldiers. Well, that was the time when the state of Florida sent this Confederate general to represent us in the United States Capitol. And there he's been for about 100 years. He was one of the last Confederate generals to surrender at the end of the Civil War, and then he fled to Mexico. He is not the best representative of this diverse, dynamic state. So after that horrendous shooting at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina, when the dialogue started about replacing these outdated racist symbols, we asked the Florida congressional delegation, we asked the Florida legislature to replace General Kirby Smith. Do you know how embarrassing it is when you're bringing students, families through the U.S. Capitol, and you say they are so excited? Who represents the state of Florida? And you say, well, John Gorey, and they get that, and then you have to say, well, this obscure Confederate general, a traitor. So that, fortunately, there was a bipartisan bill passed in the legislature a couple of years ago, and Doris and I then commenced kind of an educational effort, because the legislature said, okay, we'll ask the public across the state of Florida who should represent the state. Doris helped with the background of Mary McLeod Bethune and helped rally historians and others. And of course, Bethune-Cookman College folks took an interest. But all across the state of Florida, they said they voted overwhelmingly for the great educator, this wonderful civil rights champion, a woman who helped veterans. And now you hear registered voters after the 19th Amendment was ratified. And one of the things I love is that the sculptor who is sculpting the Mary McLeod Bethune statue is a female.
Oh, no.
From Fort Lauderdale, Neil DeComas. And she, the good news is she's well along the way and is about to head back to Italy to begin sculpting the final statue. And she actually has gone to the quarry where Michelangelo would get his marble. Oh. And she's on track. And this will be a wonderful, wonderful representative of the state of Florida, and the first African American that a state will send to represent a state in the Statuary Hall collection. Can you believe that?
I know. Those are the kind of things that you really can't fathom.
Actually, we might have to hurry to be the first, because Arkansas is going to replace one of its statues with one of Daisy Bates. Daisy Bates was president of the Arkansas NAACP and led the movement to integrate the high school at Little Rock Central High School in 1957, and endured death threats. And so she's going to
we better get moving. We missed it once with our opportunity to be first with women. Yeah, so we better get moving. But this has been absolutely fascinating. So Doris, any closing remarks or any tidbits you feel like you left out? It's all been fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. Two quick things. Mary McLeod Bethune is not just a Floridian. She was extremely influential worldwide.
Yes.
And she was the only woman of color at the founding meeting of the United Nations, appointed by Harry Truman. So we need to remember her in that international profile as well. And I want to hold up, I think the camera can see this. This was a postage stamp issued yesterday with yellow, purple, and white in honor of the 19th Amendment. The fact that it was issued yesterday, I a little dubious.
Well, better late than never, especially the way.
You know that postal service right now.
That's right. Yeah, so good for them. Well, that is wonderful, and it'll be wonderful when we get to the point that it doesn't matter. You don't have to be first. You don't have to. I often say when Mayor Iorio, I was sworn in as the first female chief. I said at the end of my tenure, I wanted to be remembered as a good chief, not the first female. But the significance of being a woman in a male position is certainly not lost on any of us here. And Kathy, you have done an amazing job, not only representing our community and our state, but representing women in such an admirable way. And we owe you a debt of gratitude without a doubt.
Well, hats off to all of the women who blazed the trail ahead of me.
Yes, isn't that the truth? And Doris, thank you so much for being the historian and ensuring that those efforts of so many of the pioneers are not forgotten. And we need to teach those in school. We don't have enough of the history of women and a number of other areas as well. But very, very important. And everyone look for City Hall to be lit up this evening in purple and yellow.
Great.
In recognition of the 19th Amendment. So very exciting. Ask you again, we do the plug for Doris's book. As you can see on her credenza back there, she has written several of them. But this really is a very exciting and informative book on the history of women and voting and really the trials and tribulations that so many went through to make sure that we had that right. And as I have said many times, people have literally died for the right to vote. And so you need to make sure that your vote counts. It is critically important. In addition to that, to ensure that we have the representation that we deserve, like Congresswoman Kathy Castor in Washington, you have to fill out your census. There are only 425 representatives that throughout the nation. So there are states that may actually lose some of their representation based on the census numbers that are going to come out. Very easy to do. We had a Facebook program on that. Please go to, we have a link to the census on our website, tampagov.net. And then you can go, I think it's Census USA, or you can do like I did and just Google census. And it literally takes you about 10 minutes to fill that out. Critically important that you fill out the census and that you vote, because every vote counts. So thank you both so much for being a part of our program today. And remember, for information, we're in the hurricane season. Our thoughts and prayers are with Louisiana and Texas as they face the wrath of Hurricane Laura that is coming. And make sure that we have the most active storm projections since 2005 this year. Yeah. So make sure you text Tampa Ready to 888-777, and for alerts in Spanish, Tampa Lista, 888-777, and you'll get real-time information on COVID-19 and also on the tracking storms and being prepared for that. So please, 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 everybody, remember, stay safe. Wear your mask, wash your hands, stay 6 feet away from everyone, and let's make kindness more contagious than this virus. Thank you all. Thank you so much for your time today. It was an incredible program. I appreciate it. You guys have a great